and welcome to the fourth episode of Tesseract Talks, the place where we put spotlight on tech trends, startups, and VCs. My name is Marko. I'm your host, CEO and founder of Tesseract Analytics, and it is my pleasure today to have Grace Francisco as our guest, a seasoned developer strategy executive with over 20 years of experience in software across both enterprises and startups. She's also a diversity advocate and an investor in multiple startups. Grace, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, pleasure having you here. In preparation for the episode, I was astonished with the number of roles and startups you're involved with, either as an angel investor or a strategic advisor. I think it's best we first start by you giving us a chronological overview of your career and roles so we can better understand your journey from big corporations like Microsoft to then startups.
Okay, sure. Well, I probably won't cover them all because that would take too many days. So I'll give you the compressed version of my origin story. My journey into tech was from a really long time ago, and it was very accidental, to tell you the truth. I left home when I was 17, and I started working right away. I've been working nonstop since I was 17 years old. And I worked my way through college off and on for 12 years. And in the middle of that, I landed a tech support role at IBM. Actually, it was Lotus subsidiary of IBM. Lotus had been already acquired. I was doing tech support there for a couple months. And in between calls, I was teaching myself how to code. I was taking coding classes in college as well, but I was also teaching myself the Lotus scripting language, and I was teaching myself SQL, and I was doing these things were very new back then, but Java, JavaScript, HTML, all these things are very new in the industry. So there weren't many experts, and I was teaching myself all these different languages. And just by sheer coincidence and chance, a application engineering role opened up that required Lotus script, JavaScript, HTML, SQL. And because Lotus script was a language that very few people knew. In fact, I never met anyone else who knew how to use Lotus script except for me because it wasn't well documented. I was the only one that could raise my hand and say, "Hi, I'm applying." I was the only decent candidate they had. So I landed this job, even though technically I had signed a contract that said I would not transfer to any other group from tech support for at least a year. But they made an exception. This is one of many exceptions that I've had in my career that was made for me. And that was the start of my software engineering role. Fast forward a little bit, I continued to be an engineer at IBM, earned my first couple of patents there before actually getting, again, I didn't have my degree for many years after that. At some point, I landed at Microsoft as a developer. We used to call them developer evangelists back then. And that is now mostly called developer advocates, because in my career as a developer evangelist at Microsoft, I spent half my time explaining that I wasn't the Bible kind of evangelist. It was a technical evangelist. And it was only a few companies that had this kind of role back then. It was Apple and Microsoft. And I spent 8 years doing this at Microsoft and honing and learning the craft and all the things that we did back then as evangelists. And for the most part, my work involved really getting developers excited about certain tools, technologies that Microsoft was bringing out, educating them on how to use it. And part of my role also morphed into doing outreach to open source communities like Drupal and WordPress and Joomla, and helping them understand the opportunity of interoperability. So interoperability being, getting other technologies to work with, in this case, Microsoft's platforms and tools. And so I was the bridge builder in that case. And it was a difficult job because, in those days, the open source communities were not really happy with Microsoft. Someone who I won't name said something terrible that was it wasn't a great thing to say about open source. I will just say, I won't quote it because everyone knows what I'm talking about. And so we had a very bad reputation at the time. And so being a build bridger at this moment in time for Microsoft was a difficult job to have. But 2.5 years later, after working with these open source communities, we were welcome members to their events, which was a lot of hard work, a lot of tough conversations, a lot of just relationship building. So I was proud of that work. And so, I know that we're talking a little bit about what's in developer relations, and it kind of depends on the timing, the company, the size of the company, the mission and goals for that year for that specific group. But I learned a lot while I was at Microsoft. When I left there, I went and took all of the skills that I had acquired. I actually thought, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to work anywhere else. What am I going to do with a developer relations job? No one's hiring developer advocates, but at that time, some guy named Mark Andreessen, no one knows who that is, said something about software eating the world, and that opened up this immense world of opportunities for those of us, the very few of us who actually knew how to do developer relations. And suddenly I was in very high demand. And so many companies wanted our help, the few of us that knew this craft, to help them publish their APIs. Even banks started publishing APIs and didn't know how to interact with developers and to drive adoption and get developers excited about that opportunity. And so it was just lucky and accidental timing, really, that I was able to then transition into leadership roles and build teams at places like Intuit and Yodlee, and then Atlassian, where I spent a few years building a team. And then from Atlassian, I went to Roblox, where I had the opportunity to work with some of the most creative, energetic, and youngest developers I've ever worked with. Some of them were 10, 11 years old. One of the most successful developers I met in the beginning had just turned 18, had already made like over $1 million on the Roblox platform, and had planned to pay for Duke University upfront on his own. And he was coming from a very simple background. He was on a small farm in the middle of Florida. It was really wonderful to hear some of these success stories. And then beyond that, I went to MongoDB and Cisco as the executive for developer relations and developer strategy activities. So that was a lot. I did go to a lot of companies. These days, I'm spending most of my time as a startup advisor and an angel investor and trying to figure out how to help the Philly ecosystem with software startups and really building more to scale in that kind of ecosystem.
What a journey so far. For those listening that are not so familiar, can you explain what does a person in developer relations role do?
It depends on the company. It's a very broad area. And in some cases, it could be something just as simple as really, truly developer support. You're using an API or using some sort of technical product, and sometimes it's not just, but a developer who has taken on the responsibility of what you might even look at as customer success, helping a developer really understand how to leverage those technologies and tools successfully. In other cases, as in Microsoft, we had lots of different types of advocates, many of whom were just always on the road. And what we would say evangelizing that technology, whatever that might be, and helping developers get excited to learn about it, to try it out, to adopt it. And so our very front and center developer advocates were great speakers. They were on stage all the time. They're at events. They're also running hackathons. And so that was another way of looking at a developer advocate. In some of my larger teams that I ran, it was also about the education component. It was about training. It was about certification. We also had a very technical marketing group that did very technical messaging, helping developers understand the opportunity at scale. So they were doing like the scaled evangelism of that tool so that they could reach developers on a global scale, help them understand that opportunity. And we had also engineering teams. In the case of Cisco, we also did internal evangelism. That internal evangelism was really about helping our internal developers understand how to responsibly publish APIs that were sustainable, that were standardized, that were easy to use, that were well documented, and that didn't break the contract of a public API with the developers externally. So you don't want to publish an API and then make changes that break other people's work, because that causes a lot of pain to the customer or partner or developer who's trying to build something. And then suddenly it's broken because you've released something and didn't give enough time to maybe retire an API or to inform the ecosystem of like significant changes that would break their applications that depend on it. And so it was really about helping to educate, even in that case, internal developers about responsible APIs, how to publish it, what does that look like, how to make sure that you continue to have a healthy ecosystem of APIs that you publish out to your developers. So like I said, it kind of depends on the size of the organization. The smaller the group, and I worked with developer advocates and startups as well, you wear a lot more hats. There you're doing the marketing, messaging components. You're also going to the hackathons. You're also doing the training. Sometimes you're also doing the documentation, the education components of it. And so when you are doing developer advocacy in a small company, you're learning pretty much all the different ways that developer advocacy can be done and the different forms it might take, because you have to wear all the different hats.
Great. On one of your posts, you wrote the following: with only 2% of VC funding, going to women, I knew I needed to be part of the change. Can you tell us a bit more about that realization moment? And also, how can we contribute towards that change?
Sure. Well, the truth is, it wasn't really a singular moment. I had organically started doing angel investing. It was the way that happened was because I built my name in developer relations. Many people sort of knew me and wanted to connect me with startups in their circle that needed funding of some kind at the very early stages and could benefit from what's called a strategic angel, someone where having them on the cap table means something and gives that startup credibility. And so that's how I started my angel investing, was investing in startups that were in developer products, developer platforms and tools. So things that I know well and can assess, because I'm a big believer in Warren Buffett's advice on invest in the things that you know, right? Because you can assess it, you can understand it. Don't invest in things that other people tell you to invest in if you have no idea what it is or have a way of assessing. Is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it a real opportunity? So I started my angel investing in the arena that I'd built some expertise in. And I've been very lucky to have a number of different startups where I've been able to participate as a strategic angel investor in these startups and developer tools and APIs that are really cool. One of my current startups is a health tech startup, and they just did a Series A round. So it was just really cool to see. They went from seed to like Series A recently, and they're getting a lot of traction. And most of the startups that I have are still continuing to build traction with new customers, new milestones like GitHub stars, the number of downloads, the adoption they're experiencing. So that's been really lovely. And what I was starting to realize as I was starting to spend more time understanding the whole venture space and angel investing is that number is that less than 2% number has been static like that for decades, like literally decades. And it's worse than the 18% of women that are in tech. So there's that number has also not moved very much. There are only 18% of women in tech. So the whole makeup of the population of tech professionals is only 18% women. And the sad thing about that is mid-career, there's something like a 30 to 35% drop off of women mid-career for a variety of reasons. Some of it is, having a child, having life changes, having a parent that they're taking care of and not being able to easily come back to work. So you'll see some companies will have these programs that will help bring back women who had like a break from work for a variety of different reasons, because they're still bringing unique technical talent that the market needs. So I would love to see more of those kinds of transitional programs in the market. Hopefully someday we'll see a lot more than what we have today. But this number is worse than that, less than 2%. Imagine less than 2%. And what that means for women who are founders is that every time they're going and pitching and trying to raise money is that they're never seeing anyone like them on the other side in many cases, because the number of VCs who are women is also very, very low. That number I don't know offhand, but it's a very low number. If that one is getting better, there are more women like me getting involved in investing. But it's daunting. And so the experience for these female founders, being a founder, period, man or woman, is a very difficult and lonely and isolating journey. They're doing really hard things, building a new company, learning the ins and outs of building a new company for the first time in many cases, building something that's never been built before, building new teams. So they're out, already doing so many difficult things. And then you add the fundraising component of it. And it's daunting for men and women both, but in particular for women. And so, as I was starting to work again with startups from the other side as an advisor, and I happened to organically end up as an advisor for a couple of female-led startups, I was starting to really recognize, wow, this is hard. This is really hard for them. And women don't get a lot of support and coaching, whether it's on the pitch or just having a sounding board from someone who's saying, okay, you've got this. Here are things that we're going to think about. Here's how we're going to maybe finesse your messaging, but your company, your product, and you got to just let the passion shine through, and you need to know your numbers, and let's make sure that you're preparing well for this pitch to this VC or angel group. That doesn't happen very often for women in tech right now, so, and these women founders. And so I feel very strongly about, being able to be on the side now where I have the luxury of being able to help in that area. I've spent a lot of time as a women in tech advocate, but now for me, it's even more important to help these founders who are on the sort of leading edge of innovation and trying to build new companies get the kind of funding they really truly deserve to be successful.
And now, in the investor role, what are the, let's say, three main things that you're looking in founders and their solutions?
Three main things. Let's see. Well, one is I look at the founder and the team dynamics. It's pretty clear there's a co-founder. I want to understand like how long have they known each other? What are the dynamics like? Are they working well? Have they built a good team? How do they operate? Like what's the operational rhythm of the business? We say this a lot at Microsoft. I can't get away from it. The rhythm of how they're running the business. What does that look like? Or is it completely chaotic? Do they need coaching? Are they coachable? Super important. So things are very rarely perfect, especially in those early stages and then a young company where everyone's new. But the main thing I'm often looking for is even if it's not anywhere close to perfect, no place is going to be perfect, but are they coachable? Do they really truly listen to the feedback? Do they incorporate it in a meaningful way? Do they know how to assess what feedback is important to prioritize over all the many other pieces of feedback they might be getting from VCs and angels and other people, friends and families, yada, yada. So that's one is the coachability, the dynamics of the leaders in the company. I'm looking at, does that product or solution really serve a true need? And are they talking to customers? What customers are they talking to? What's the feedback from the customers? Like, how are they tracking that feedback? And are they reacting to everything? Or do they know how to really truly prioritize the things that matter? Do they understand how to shape what that initial, some people call it MVP, some people are now calling it minimal lovable product, which I like because a viable product doesn't sound great. No one wants to buy a minimal viable product, but lovable product, sure. I want to have a lovable
Sounds
product.
much better.
It's true. And I can appreciate the people who are moving to this new acronym, minimal lovable product. Lastly, what am I looking for? I'm looking for traction. What kind of traction do they have? And it depends on the stage of the company, those early stages. I want to see that you've had many conversations and hopefully you have like a couple people committed to being a design partner. They're committed to using your product, giving you feedback. They're not necessarily committed to paying you because yet they haven't seen the minimal lovable product yet, but hey, do you have meaningful conversations with people? Have you thought about the constructive way of having those conversations where, and I recommend this book all the time to the founders that I work with, which is the mom test. You don't want to ask for feedback in the way that you would ask your mom for feedback, because you know what? Your mom's always going to say, that's great, honey. Yes, of course I would buy that from you. That's not the kind of feedback you need when you're an early stage startup. You need good, constructive feedback that's honest. And so being able to use a framework like what's discussed in the mom test is a good way of sort of formulating true feedback versus going to your friends and family and having them all say, oh yeah, that's nice, honey. You're going to end up down this rat hole of stuff that isn't meaningful and you're going to waste time. You don't want to do that.
Well, yeah, great. I think a lot of people wrote some notes on these three things, so you'll probably start getting some applications. Thank you so much, Grace, for your valuable insights. That was all for today. It was really a pleasure talking to you. And I hope we will continue our talk perhaps either on another episode in future or maybe if you come and visit London. Until next episode, wishing you and our audience all the best.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Pleasure.